I'm very, very happy to have Vegard Skirbekk here, who's going to speak about understanding the global transition to low fertility. Demography is something that has been a red thread for this institute forever. We do it in all kind of different ways, in many different ways now, because we also have philosophers. We are not only talking about what's happening, but whether it's good and bad. But this is really straight into what we are interested in here. So Vegard is a professor of population and family health at Columbia, Aging Center at Columbia University, and also a senior researcher at the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. And he got his PhD from Rostock University, Germany in 2005, and his research is mainly focused on health, productivity, and from a multidisciplinary perspective. And he has an emphasis on the role of changing labor market demands, technological and cultural change, as well as variation in attitude, beliefs, and competence of new cohorts. Sounds like what we're doing at the Institute, so why are you not here? But anyway, you're here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gustav. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming this morning. So I'm very happy to be back. I used to spend quite a bit of time here quite a few years ago, and I think it's a really, really excellent place. So I'm happy to be here again. And thanks, Martin, for inviting me. So I will start off by showing a graph which I think most of you know to some extent. So this is the global change in gross fertility, not number of surviving children, but number of children born from 1950s until our days, where it has decreased from around 5 to less than half of that, to around 2.2, 2.3 children per woman. And why has this occurred? Why has this fertility change occurred? That is something I'd like to speak about in this talk, and also where it's going to go. Is fertility going to stay low, continue to drop, or perhaps increase again? The most populous country on the planet as of now, just overtaking China, used to have be characterized by many things, but one of them was to that it had very high fertility rates. That is no longer the case. So if you look at state level, this is fertility rates across Indian states. And if you look at state level fertility in India, you find that with the exceptions of some states where fertility is dropping quite rapidly, especially Bihar and the highly populous Uttar Pradesh region, Jharkhand, most of state level fertility in India is fairly low, often below replacement fertility, such as in southern India, often much lower than what you observe here in Sweden, including in Goa, Andaman Nicobar Islands, 1.3 TFR, but also in Muslim-dominated Jammu and Kashmir with 1.4 TFR. And some parts have even lower, like Sikkim, with only 1.1 child per woman. Another example, which is also very famous, is South Korea. And if you look at, so these are period years on the horizontal axis. And if you go back to the 1950s, you find that fertility in South Korea was around 6 children per woman. It gradually dropped over time. And unlike what many demographers thought would happen, where it was quite common among demographers to assume that fertility would somehow rebound around replacement level, 2 children per family would be the future. South Korea turned out to be an extreme case. So not only did it have very, very high fertility historically, but it also turned to extremely low fertility in contemporary times. And current 2023 evidence suggests that fertility has dropped to around 0.7 children per woman. So that is almost just a tenth of, a little bit more than a tenth of what fertility used to be back around the late 1950s. But also more in the Nordic countries, we've seen rapid changes in fertility, but much less rapid. And this is very important if you want to understand global fertility trends. So often people talk about this as these changes being universal, and to some extent they are, but history was not universal. One had very different fertility in recent years. So while fertility was around 6 children per woman in the late 1950s, fertility in the Nordics was far below that, and around 3, 2.5 or below around 1960. and it gradually dropped as the majority of European countries observed fertility dropping to below replacement levels in the 1970s. And it has stayed below. So if you went back, if you had this presentation 10, 15 years ago, we would perhaps talk about Nordic exceptionalism, Nordic fertility been fairly high, in spite of it being highly modern, advanced economies. No longer the case. Fertility has further dropped in Norway. It's predicted to be 1.34 this year, if the trends continue. Sweden, a little bit higher, but not much, maybe 1 or 2 decimals higher. Fertility has become similar to the rest of Europe, also in the Nordic countries, with fertility far below replacement levels. And why is this happening? I don't think we have good answer for that. The group I'm representing, who's supposed to be the experts, missed. Many of them at least thought it would be would stay around replacement levels, rebound to replacement levels, but it did not. It fell, and in many countries continues to fall to levels considerably below that. There has been a growth in childlessness. So the share of women childless at age 40 has now increased to very high levels in countries such as Japan, with more than a quarter of all women being childless, more than 20% in Germany, Singapore, and also high levels in Italy, Spain, Finland, all of below 20%.
What year is that?
These are the most recent years we have in this data set. I can give you the reference later on. But what I wanted to illustrate here is that although fertility of this group of countries and this group of countries is quite similar, the childlessness levels is much, much lower in Central and Eastern Europe. In countries such as Estonia, Russia, Belarus, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, childlessness at age 40 is much lower for women, in spite of fertility being at very low levels, which suggests that women have at least one child, but then often stop. While there's a different distribution in many Western European countries, where you have a much higher share of women having 2 children if they start 2 or 3 children if they start having children. And it's also important gender phenomenon. So if you look, so demography is unfortunately not a gender equal subject. In my view, it should be much more. So the vast majority of research is done on women and on female childlessness, female fertility, particularly because we have much better data. But actually the more dramatic effects are not seen among the women. This is for data from Norway. We see a rise in female childlessness for the 1940 to 1979 cohorts, increasing quite dramatically from around 10% to 16-17% for the later cohorts. But much more dramatic effects are seen among the men. And male fertility was around 15% for those born 1940, but it's increased to over 30% among the latest born cohorts, and tendency is still increasing. So this means that fertility, childlessness is twice as important for men than for women, at least for Norway. And for many reasons this is important, partly because fertility implications of childlessness can be at least as important for men as for women. There are strong health-related effects of being childless, which might be as strong for men as for women. And there's also, and the effects are much more pronounced in recent years for men than for women, at least for Norway. But this is also similar to the case of, for instance, the US, where I work, and we also see a strong increase in male childlessness there. So what do people think? People have strong views. So if you study fertility, you will realize that everyone else in society are also experts on the topic. So and this is an example of a questionnaire where we ask people, men and women, aged 25 to 45, what they think is the preferred age for first birth. For women, the yellow line. For men, the blue line. And for the last birth. How old should we be when we start and stop having children? And for women, the preference is that you should start childbearing around age of 27. All the women think you could start a little bit earlier, but not so much. and men should start childbearing around the age 28 or so. And they should stop childbearing. The youngest women think they should stop around age 35, the older women around 38. And for men, they should stop around 39 or 41 or so, depending on own age. So there's a fairly narrow window when people think. So this is not the biological optimum, but this is what people see as the ages one should have children. So it's a fairly narrow age range for when one should have children according to this preference data. So why are we having fewer children? So first of all, are we actually having so much fewer children? I think this is if you remember one graph of this presentation, please remember the following one, because I think it's almost never mentioned. And that is from another neighboring country, Denmark, which has excellent historical data. So we're not having so much fewer children if you look at net fertility. So this graph shows the number of children per woman from the late 18th century up until modern days for Denmark. And we almost always discuss the blue line, total fertility rates, how is period fertility changing with time. So it was around 4 or 5 children per woman back in the early 19th century, gradually declining over time. That is well known. But many of these children died before they could reproduce themselves. So if you take into account mortality and look at the number of women number of children who survived to reproductive ages, you find that it was close to 2 children per woman back in the early 19th century and late 18th century. A period with slow population growth or population stability. And what we're seeing now is many people say fertility has been halved, but if you consider it in terms of net fertility, fertility has only dropped by a mere quarter compared to what it used to be. Now most children survive, but you have you should also consider this, that in terms of net reproduction, fertility has declined much less than what you would commonly think. And this is important because you have this is what creates the age waves, and this is also a reason why this relatively moderate changes in net fertility also creates relatively moderate and slow changing age distributions in the population, which makes it a lot easier to deal with the consequences of low fertility, which is not the case for many other parts of the world. So if you, for example, consider fertility in countries such as in other parts of Europe, you find that this pattern is often quite similar to the situation in Denmark, with fairly low net reproduction levels, seldom above 3. So in France, it was never above 2.8 or so, and that happened in the 60s before fertility declined again. While if you go to other parts of the world, the highest level of net fertility I ever observed for any country is Kuwait in the late 1960s, where it was 6.8 surviving children per woman. And now fertility has dropped towards and below replacement levels. And that implies that you have very large cohorts surviving, followed by very, very small cohorts surviving, less than a third in the size, which can create huge challenges because you have much more rapid aging, you have much larger cohorts aging, followed by much smaller cohorts, and it makes it much harder to politically deal with the consequences of low fertility. So moderate, slow changes are easier to deal with and much more foreseeable, and you can change institutions, policies, and manage low fertility to a much greater extent than what the case would be if you have these relatively slow changes that is typically observed in European countries. So, how many children could a woman have if you have unprotected sex during your reproductive life? It's hard to know because you could speculate, you could have models, but you could also try to observe this in different populations. Some evidence from, for example, heterozygous families in the US suggests that you might have up to 7 to 10 children per woman. You tend to have the last child at relatively high ages, typically between ages 41 and 50, and very few, only 1 to 3% in these populations tend to remain childless of the women. according to the Guinness Book of World Records, there's lots of variations between individuals, and Valentina Vasiliev from Shuya, Russia, had 69 children in the 18th century. So there's huge variation, and it's not quite certain how many children you actually biologically have in the extremes. She was pregnant, by the way, 27 times and gave birth to 16 pairs of twins, 7 sets of triplets, and 4 sets of quadruplets. And it might also be systematic differences between groups due to contextual, biological, environmental factors. For example, the ages of menopause and menarche might differ between different groups, which might also affect one's reproductive capacity. So one common discussion is, which I don't think we have settled at all, is the reduction in semen quality. This is often suggested as a key reason for why fertility is dropping. I think it's very, very difficult to know because we don't, much of the data on semen quality, on semen motility, on semen concentration is taken from from fertility clinics. We have a very select samples, so we don't really know what the population level averages are and how it changes over time. But some people argue that for various reasons semen quality might drop, and this could influence fertility. It certainly is important for many couples who are challenged by infecundity, but whether it affects overall fertility levels, I think that's much less certain. I think the answer is we don't really know because we don't have good enough data. But there are other biological mechanisms that could be important and might actually work in the opposite direction. So this is evidence from on the year of one's first menstruation using Norwegian data from the 1880s towards the 1980s. And what you can see is that the age of menarche decreased from 15 and a half, 16 years down to around 13 years and slightly below for the most recent years. So, which could suggest that one's reproductive window is widening. And it's also important to remember that fertility problems can be caused by many different health problems, and the average health of women in reproductive ages have markedly increased in recent years. There's also much better reproductive support in terms of new technologies, for example, assisted reproductive technologies such as IVF for ICSI, ovulation induction, pre-implantation diagnosis, semen retrieval, and other new medical advances which could help couples that previously were not able to have children to have children. So there is, I believe, quite strong evidence that it's, by some dimensions, easier to have children than earlier because support is better, and there's also increased health and possibly longer reproductive windows. If you look at variation according to education in terms of childlessness, this is evidence from Austria, Great Britain, Netherlands, Norway, Spain, United States, for those with women with low, medium, and high education. The light gray bars, I don't know if you can see it well, they show the proportion who intend to be childless, which is for many of the countries, most countries fairly low, typically below 10%. In many countries much lower, such as in Norway, it's 5% or less. But in spite of this, you have, for all education levels, you have relatively high levels of childlessness. So it's typically not wanted, not intended. Where actual childlessness in Norway is several times higher than the proportion who intend to be childless. And very high among some groups, say among the highly educated women in Spain or the Netherlands or in Austria. So why is this happening? Well, I think it's important to think how society has changed and what you think of as important to do before having children. And there's much more you would like to do before having children now than what used to be the case. One typically would like to complete one's education, to complete a relatively long school career, to try to find a job, a secure job, try to find a stable partner, try to get married for many, certainly try to accumulate a certain amount of wealth or have some money in the bank. For many countries, there's a norm that you should be able to own a house, own some sort of dwelling that might be adequate for starting a family before having children. And there's also many new factors that have become more important in recent years, including traveling for a year, playing the dating field, trying out different partners, which could take a lot of time, and also trying to find the perfect partner, if you'd like, which is increasingly online. These online dating systems are highly effective, but also in terms of fertility, realization of fertility ideals, they might be highly ineffective in terms of it takes a long time to find the partner one wants, and there's too many alternatives for many. One might be dissatisfied to a greater extent and not sure whether one maybe can find a different one. It takes a lot of time to try to move in together, to test out different partners before having children. And again, with education, the growth in education has been worldwide, occurred all over the world for all religious groups, for both genders. People prefer not to have children while in education. Education levels have increased. And it takes a lot longer to find a steady job or build the kind of career one wants before having children. While the school leaving ages rises, also the ages of entering the labor market increases, and it takes more time to build a career. One would perhaps like to have a higher level in the career hierarchy before having children, having the labor market interruption which childbearing represents. And there's a much higher share, particularly among women, who now are in career-oriented types of work where this occurs, takes longer and longer time. And also importantly, which I think is often forgotten, or maybe people are simply unaware, that there's been a shift in peak earnings over time. So if you look at historical data on age earnings profiles, something I find extremely interesting, it says a lot about how societies have changed. You typically find that earnings in Europe peaked quite early in life, often in the 30s, and then plateaued or declined thereafter. If you go back to the early 20th century. And nowadays, this is typically not the case. Often you experience peak earnings very late enough, maybe just before retirement. And this is often much later than your peak reproductive years, which is challenging because you might need the money more when you're younger and about to start a family. While when you're older, you might have less need for the money in terms of family formation. And coming back to the online dating, there's more and more traits and characteristics and interests and preferences to click on and to choose from. And one study found that the odds of a single person finding a partner with the desired characteristics on any given day in the UK is 1 out of 562. There is evidence that women are more selective than men. And on Tinder, men are 6.2 times more likely to like the woman than the other way around. And I think importantly, more and more factors matter. So in the past, you might have few to choose from, but now there's more and more traits. I'll come back to that in a minute, including education, but also income, personality, political views, and so forth, which might become more important for later cohorts. And politically, very important, not least from my home country, has been the rapid increase in housing prices. That has become so much more expensive to establish yourself. So these are real prices adjusted for inflation. And you find that for Norway, they have, in the period 1995 to 2016, it has continued to increase thereafter, but just for this period, real housing prices have tripled, making it a lot harder for people who are young to establish themselves, and also representing a net shift in wealth from younger to older age groups. Older being much more likely to own property compared to younger age groups. So this is a challenge in terms of family formation, And many of the policies that are introduced to help boost fertility often focus on parental leave subsidies or cash payments, which are really tiny amounts compared to how much it costs to buy a house in places where young people would like to live. So I think if you really want to do something, you should really address the housing prices. And this is a very sensitive topic, but I think it's really where you have to go if you want to make life easier for those who like to establish themselves.
So does that data generalize all over the world?
Well, that's a broad question. I think it's for many places, yes. For many for Nordic countries, I think to some extent, yes. All over the world, I'm not sure, but I think for many countries, yes.
Looking for an explanation. We would like to see the shifts in other countries. Are they also affected by?
Oh, housing prices, yeah. I think for sure. Yeah. And I think the kind of new factors that become more and more important in terms of affecting whether you have children or not, there's just more and more traits. I'd like to highlight one study, and this sounds absurd, but this is what we find. We compared for the Tromsø cohort, which is one of a major health survey in Norway. We have measures of strength, physical strength, using a dynamometer. You basically squeeze as hard as you can, and if you're strong enough, it shows in the number of kilos you're able to squeeze. And we look at whether people are married or their marital status by how strong they squeeze, according to different cohorts. And what we find is that for women, it never really matters. So women are less strong than men, but it doesn't matter for their marital status. So women who are strong or weak, they are just as likely to marry. For men, for the older cohort, it also does not matter. They are equally likely to be married or divorced or single or widowed, regardless of how strong they squeeze. However, we find for later-born cohorts, we find that it does matter. And we find that for the later-born generation, men with low physical strength are less likely to marry and more likely to be single. We don't know about causality, but our theory is that they are men with low physical strength are somehow selected away in the marriage market. But we're not sure. But it's in one way it makes because of a greater focus on physical appearance in dating markets, possibly. But in one way it does not make much sense because there's hardly any jobs where you need physical strength anymore. But yeah, question.
Grip strength is very much related. That was easy. Okay, and grip strength is very much correlated also to how long you live.
Yep.
So does this also show in the age differences?
Well, it does but I don't think we have observed this cohort at the age where fairly few have died. So I don't think that is what is driving it. And it could be somehow that if you're in a marriage, you use your muscles more, but we don't understand why this should be the case.
And if you fence, you have very good grip strength, eh? If you fence, he fences.
So, and this is just one example of many new traits which might become more important. We also find more or less the same mechanism for personality traits. We find that for women it's fairly stable over time how personality relates to family formation partnerships, but for men being high on neuroticism, neuroticism being emotionally up and down, is a very common personality trait. Many men and women have this personality trait. For women it doesn't matter so much, but for men it means for early-born cohorts it didn't matter so much, but for newer generation, if you're high on neuroticism, you're less likely to form a family. And again, we suspect this might have to do with selection in terms of who gets selected into marriages or not. And it's actually a public health issue as well, because if you are a neurotic person, you benefit especially from having a spouse, from having somebody to support you, and help you out, support you emotionally and practically, and that if you're of this group, marriage is actually a concern. Yeah. So coming back to what to do, there's more and more things to do before having children: education, jobs, marriage, partnerships, accumulating wealth, having enough wealth, and dating, leisure activities, moving in together. But there's also an overestimation often of how people are likely to conceive, also among educated women. This is ovarian reserves by age. We tend to decrease from very early in life up until the 40s. And one survey of 700 Australians of reproductive age found that 58% believe that the women's fertility only starts to decline from age 35 or older, which is not the case. And only 14% understand that male fertility also tends to decline about from the age of 45. One factor I focused quite a bit on has been on religion. So religion, you might say, is not so important in secular society, and I think it's very important, especially in secular society, or it has become important because society has become secular. Religion is, for many people around the world, also in this part of the world, an important identity marker, a basis for self-understanding, but also for demographic behavior. It can affect lifestyles, diet, risks, physical and mental health, but also whether one marries and have children. So most of the world's population has a religion. 31.5% Christian, 23.2% Muslims, and 16.3% unaffiliated, Chinese population being the largest. And this is the world in terms of majority religion. Some countries, such as Nigeria, is evenly split by the two dominant religions, Christians and Muslims. There's a Muslim dominance in Middle East, North Africa, and parts of West Asia. The red countries are countries with a Christian dominance, and Buddhists, Hindus dominate South Asia, with still relatively few countries having a unaffiliated majority, actually declining share. We find that because of the growth of Africa, the proportion of the world population having a religious affiliation is not decreasing, it's increasing from 84 to 87% from 2010 to 2015. And in terms of Christianity, the further away you go from the origins of Christianity, the more Christian the world is, in terms of being further away from Bethlehem. And you also find that this is important for countries which are highly secular, such as say Norway. So this is a questionnaire. You asked the same question, thankfully, from 1985 to 2022 in Norway. Do you believe in God? 1985, 52% said yes. 2022, 27%. So it's been a rapid decrease in proportion believing in God. There is fertility differences by religion, where Christians and Muslims have the highest, 3 children. Buddhists, unaffiliated, other religions have the lowest, 1.7 children. We do find that these differences are still significant and large, even if we account for education and income. It's hard to know at the population level what fertility would be like, but we use one rough proxy for Norway. So we have statistically quite good data on whether you marry in the city hall, have a secular wedding, or if you marry in the church, in the state church. So it's this is for the whole Norwegian population. And we find, I focus on the men, that for those who married in the state church, this is by birth cohort, you find that fertility levels have actually been quite stable over time, 2.2 children per man. For those who married in the city hall, having a civil marriage, it's been consistently below replacement fertility, 1.8 or so children per person. And what has happened here is that there's been a shift over time in terms of where how many belong to different categories. So there's many fewer marry now in the church, still quite common. Many more marry in the city hall. Still many more cohabit and don't marry. They have still lower fertility, and those who are single have lower fertility as well. Similar patterns are found for women. So there's been a compositional shift over time, which can be very important for explaining fertility change. Education is still more important on a global scale. And to understand, for example, what high fertility in Africa, we had a large project with an ERC and Templeton Foundation funding support. And I think this graph is maybe the most important of everything we produced during that project. This was with Pew. It's the reason things look nice, not because of our group. And we find that for even within countries, you find huge differences in religious groups in terms of school levels. So, for example, for Kenya, only 11% have no formal schooling among Christians. Almost 60% among Muslims have no formal schooling. And this is generally the trend, not for all countries. There are some countries where Christians are more likely to have no formal schooling, by 10 points or more in 4 countries in Africa. But still, very high shares have no education whatsoever in many African countries, particularly among Muslim groups. And this is a key reason, I think, for differences in fertility between groups, and also because a key reason for the overall high fertility of Africa. But at the same time, you also see a rapid increase in education levels in many parts of Muslim-dominated countries, including to some extent for men, say in Qatar, Kuwait, it increased rapidly. Saudi Arabia, proportion of men with higher education increased from 16 to 28% for the younger generation. But the increase has been much more rapid for women than for men. And say in Qatar, for women, it increased from 13% among the oldest generation to 51% in Qatar for the for the younger generation, proportion of Muslims with higher education. So things are happening very rapidly, at least in some parts of the continent. Will fertility recover? So fertility is declining to low levels. So this is a theory Wolfgang Lutz and I developed 20 or so years ago, which actually has gotten a lot of attention in recent years. It's called the low fertility trap hypothesis. And it argues that once fertility hits low levels, it's likely to stay low for 3 reasons. And the first one being that this is uncontroversial. If there's fewer women of reproductive age, there will be fewer women to reproduce in the next generation, and hence there will be fewer births. The first mechanism. The second mechanism is more sociological, and that is if you have fewer siblings, if you grow up in a society or community with fewer other children around, you get socialized and used to having small families, and that also influences your personal ideas, your intentions to have children, and also your realized fertility. So that's so with fewer and fewer siblings and children around, your fertility ideals also decline. And the third one is the one I've been trying to highlight on relating to economic mechanisms where people's material aspirations increase probably. One would like to have more and more before having children. One would at least like to have the same material level as one's parents before starting childbearing. But at the same time, fertility, one is likely to have reached these levels at older ages. There's more social security, uncertainty for the young. One gets older by the time one is able to buy a house than what used to be the case, and this depresses fertility further. So these 3 mechanisms depress fertility, and it might particularly be important once fertility falls below a certain level. We said around 1.5 children per woman, and it's harder then to increase fertility level again once fertility goes below this. So again, this is politicians in also the Nordic countries often try to implement policies, try to be pronatal, but it often it's well meant, but often one does not address what is most important for raising fertility. Often it's information campaigns, encouragements to have more children, but policies that are pronatal often tend to fail, not have effects whatsoever, only have short-term effects, and might not matter so much in the longer term. Antenatal policies, on the other hand, such as those implemented, say, in Iran or in other parts of the world, are often, like in Bangladesh, have often been very effective. So one does know how to decrease fertility, and the examples from these countries suggest that fertility can decline over very short periods of time, down to around 2 children per woman. There's also new mechanisms for childbearing decisions, and most of them tend to go in the direction of depressing fertility further. One might be fearful of the future, fear the world one's children might live in, including risks of increased conflict, climate change, resource scarcities, pollution levels, job availability. One survey from the UK suggests that 40% of young people fear having children due to the climate crisis. And I think these kind of mechanisms might become more important in the future. So a little bit of advertisement. This is a recent book which I wrote, which go through most of the arguments I presented today and try to go more in detail, elaborating these arguments, and I try to summarize the evidence as good as I can. And if I may, I think a key the whole field of fertility, if you try to publish in fertility journals, you have to choose, do you want a biological journal, do you want a sociological, economic journal, do you want a journal focused on assisted reproductive technologies or new forms of contraceptives or family planning and so forth. It's very, very specialized in different subfields, which can be positive, but can also be negative in terms of there's too little interdisciplinary work being done. And that is what I hope to do, contribute a little bit to with this book, where I try to focus on bringing everything together. And I try to have an open mind and not use my own background. And I'm originally an economist. I'm not sure if that explains always the fertility trends, but I think that is something that should be done much more in terms of understanding fertility change, having integrated assessments. Now, with that said, there's a lot of doomsday discussions on low fertility. I would like to counter that a little bit. So this is the 10 largest economies in the world. And for the first time in history, all of these 10 economies, including India, have below replacement fertility. So most of what is produced in the world is produced in below replacement fertility countries. And some of them, like Germany or Japan, much below replacement fertility. This is a fairly new development. So, challenges associated with low fertility is often discussed, but this is, in some of these countries, fertility has been below replacement, such in Germany for more than half a century. And still, Germany is an important industrial nation, and same goes for many of these other countries. So it's not necessarily the case that even if fertility drops, one will become less relevant. Actually, it's increasing shares of world GDP is produced in countries with below replacement fertility.
Surely you need to take migration into account in that diagram.
Well, for some countries, not so much for
States.
China or
Germany.
Yeah, absolutely. Migration plays an important role in some, but not all countries, and will not change the prospect of an aging population. Very importantly, migrants tend to adapt their fertility patterns to the native country, and also coming to aging. So this is how the world is often portrayed in terms of aging, with countries such as Sweden, Japan having very old age dependency ratios, while other parts of the world, particularly say Saudi Arabia, much of Africa, Mongolia, having Papua New Guinea, having very low dependency ratios, because the share above 65 is fairly low compared to the working age population. Now, this is all wrong. People use this all the time, but it's I would argue that one should not do it, and it's a misconception of what age represents. So if you account for the fact that people get poor health at different ages, so this is a paper we did in Lancet, where we found that if you compare the age, if you compare the average age one has poor health with that of the global population's health at age 65, you find that one only reaches the same level of poor health in Japan in the mid-late 70s, while it occurs much earlier in countries such as Papua New Guinea, where it occurs unfortunately already in the 40s. And if you account for this, that one doesn't get old at the age of 65, which is a meaningless concept. It's not comparable across time, across regions, across countries, and it's certainly not relevant for planning and understanding what aging means. One gets a very different picture. One finds that countries such as, say, Russia has a fairly old population and also relatively poor health, while countries such as Sweden and Norway, where you keep good health to relatively high ages, has actually a fairly low dependency ratio, younger than what you would find in countries such as Argentina, the US, Somalia, India, Pakistan, Mongolia. And the reason is that one has maintained good health to later ages at the population level, which might have to do with, for example, universal social security, investments in education for both genders, and an emphasis on healthy lifestyles. And this now pays off in some parts of the world, but not in many other parts of the world, where say in many parts of Africa one has poor health from a much younger age, and it's increasingly lifestyle related. And this implies that the world is much more similar in terms of aging. There's no young region of the world. We are quite old, all of us, or quite young, depending on how you see it. And also that you should. There's no way to avoid all the populations, but you can try to age well and age healthier. And we probably should invest much more also in this part of the world in order to achieve this. So to sum up, I see my time is almost out. More and more countries and regions are and will see fertility enter below replacement levels. Many of the underlying factors leading to late and low fertility are unlikely to go away. For example, the onset of late and low norms of fertility. 30s is now increasingly seen as the years of childbearing. One can use 120s for other things. There's no sudden drop in housing prices. Education levels keep on increasing. In some parts of the world, not all, secularization plays an important role, individualization, which could depress fertility. And many future foreseeable changes are more likely to depress rather than raise fertility, such as climate and technology-driven unemployment. Global fertility has been halved in more than that in the last 50 years and is continuing to fall. And we have better and better access to safe contraception, education is increasing, and mortality is declining. So, for example, a key reason for having high fertility in many countries of the world used to be the expectation that many children would die before reaching adulthood. That is decreasingly the case. Fertility will continue to be influenced by a complex mix of biology, education, culture, technology, and religion. And there's a lack of any example of any countries that have ever managed to reverse the trend towards low fertility. Still, better information, policies in some sensitive policy areas, particularly housing, may help reduce the decline. Still, the future is likely to be characterized by low and late fertility, and this might be quite fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sure there are going to be many questions after this fascinating talk. We both have people online and in the room. And for you here in the room, you put up your hand if you want to ask a question. And then if you want to do a follow-up, you put up a finger. So that should be a follow-up and nothing else. And for you online, you use the chat function. So if you want to ask a question, you write it in chat and write hand or finger, depending on the question. So if it's a new question, write hand and finger and who you're following up to. And then also write your area of study, because we like to find questions. We're interdisciplinary, we like to find questions from different fields. Very good. And we already have lots of questions. Let me just first ask you about one question. Everything will be fine, you said toward the end. I mean, that part you didn't talk so much about. We have other demographers here at the Institute, and they're looking a little bit further than usually demographers are comfortable doing. But if you look at 2100 or 2150, looking at all these trends, and as you said, it seemed to be that government can't really affect fertility that much, maybe maximum 0.3 or something like that. We have had this exponential growth in population. Why wouldn't we get maybe at around 2100 an exponential decline, a population crash, if we continue lying like this below fertility rates? How come this is going to be fine, according to you?
So first of all, I think there's far too much skepticism. Population is half the equation in terms of climate change. Having a lower population might give many positive impacts, some positive impacts which might be very difficult to achieve through other means.
That's a little bit too late, because we need to fix climate change in the next 30 years. I was talking about 2100.
Right.
So you're not going to fix climate change at all by having a population falling in 2100.
Well, it will continue to be a problem in the coming decades, and it's certainly, since fertility is declining so much quicker than what we thought, it will have an impact also in the next couple of decades. So I believe it will have an impact in the coming decades already, and it certainly is, and many of the ways to deal with declining populations is already here. If we implement today's technologies in agriculture, we don't need the more than 800 million people currently working in agriculture. No, we can produce what everything we eat in the world by with perhaps 16 million people, according to one recent study. So there's a lot of room for improving productivity with less people, and not necessarily decreasing living standard. So I think we have to do massive changes, and it's certainly not obvious that we will be able to do this, but I think things could be fine if we manage to do this.
So do you have any historical example of a country that have survived by having the population half or down to 1/4?
Well, nobody knows,
Exactly.
but this is as good as I think. This kind of discussions is what we need more of, basically, to try to understand this. But yes,
anyway, I shouldn't keep the floor. This is more to discuss. Anna, and you're going to get the microphone.
Is it on? Hi, thank you for a fascinating expose. My name is Anna. I'm Associate Professor of Business Studies. I was wondering a bit about the political side of things, that we see in some countries in the world a backlash in regulation when it comes to fertility related issues like abortion, for example. And we are social scientists, so of course we discuss political and cultural and religious reasons behind that. But I was wondering, are there also demography-driven factors behind, for example, now maybe Poland will be changing, but like US, I'm talking about US, are there demographic arguments, and have there been studies about this correlation, if there is a correlation?
Right. No, it's an excellent question, and I think there's an intention to have a backlash by conservative governments, but I'm not sure how successful they have been, actually. And there's some evidence suggesting that it has not led to increasing fertility. It's not necessarily led to decreases in nationwide or region-wise abortions. So it's hard to say whether they have been effective in decreasing abortion opportunities. So I think it's too early to say, basically.
But they've been using demographic and population arguments, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, but yeah.
Well, no follow-up on that. Okay, then we jump to Malcolm. Send over the man from Graz.
Hi, I'm a sociologist, mostly not doing anything related to this, although with one exception with Martin. But I have a rather idiosyncratic question, which is, you presented such a panorama, so there's lots of different bits to pick up on. I wanted to pick up on the argument that one reason fertility rates might have declined is because of declining child or infant mortality. You talked about this. And you sort of suggested something I've heard many times before, which is that people used to sort of make a choice to have, in a sense, extra children because they expected a couple to die off. And my question is, do we really know that's true? Because it sort of suggests children were like lottery tickets, and you sort of bought a couple extra to ensure that you would win. And yet, if you look at like literature from centuries ago, it's not like losing a child was ever like a minor thing. And I just wonder psychologically, could people actually handle a rational calculation like, oh, a couple of these things that I adore more than like myself are just going to die off, and that's okay, so I'll have a bunch extra.
So it's certainly so it's a good question, and I completely agree that it certainly was not easy or any easier in the past than today. I don't think I said this, and it's but it's at the same time, yes, I think it was taken into the to the decision making. People saw that many of one's siblings did not grow up, and if you would like to have a certain number of surviving offspring at the individual, but also at the community or population level, this is what institutions and individual decisions to some extent was influenced by. I think so. And also there's some evidence that after in some cases people do argue that they had chose to have another pregnancy because they lost their child and they did not see this. Yeah.
Sorry, follow up. What evidence?
So there's evidence from individual level data from, for example, you have crisis, sudden mortality increases because of peaks in death rates. And there's some, I discuss some of this also in the book, and this might influence some to have more children than they otherwise would. And I also think it's important to understand the historical institutions. Why did we have I didn't go so much in it in the talk, but for example, a key reason why we had religious institutions promoting fairly late fertility, but not too late fertility, was to not have too high, too high. Should turn that off. Too high number of net offspring. And these institutions gradually varied. We also know that there's evidence suggesting that if mortality was expected to increase, this might have influenced fertility decisions. Yes, there is some.
Then move on to Joe.
Hi. So I'm a philosopher. The question I want to ask you is about the coincidental childlessness bit. I was quite struck by that, and I wanted to ask you first a bit about how you kind of study that. So there was one thing that was people's intent to be childless, and then the other was just the raw numbers of people who were childless. I think maybe it was just women. So when do you ask about the desire to have children? Because it seems to me like it might change over time, and so the point at which it's studied would matter. And I assume those are not same person data, they're just averages, like the actual number of children and the average intent.
Both, actually. Yeah. And there's also, so in addition to asking at different points in time, which is certainly something we do have changing fertility preferences across the life cycle. And people do adjust depending on their current economic partnership, social situation, health situation. But there's also also qualitative evidence suggesting that people say that, well, this is what my life ended up to be. I ended up to be childless. It was not my intent when I was 18, say, but this is because of life circumstances I did not know from the start. This is how my family situation ended up to be. So I think people do adjust for sure, but it's often not intentional from the start, hence coincidental.
Yeah. I guess the reason I wondered is if it is something like intent at age 18 or something. I mean, I had many intentions at age 18, but now I look back and I think, what did he know? So like how seriously do you take that initial intent? I had lots of friends who when they were 18 were like, I'm going to have 6 children. And how many of them have 6 children now? None. But is that a real decline in intent? Sort of, but sort of no.
Yeah, no, that is what we have to deal with. You have to ask them at different ages. I mean, of course, you don't only ask at 18, but also later. And people do have often higher fertility intentions and ideals, what they, in an ideal society, would be able to have than they're actually able to realize.
Okay, so I have a follow-up on that question. It was connecting to this. At what age should you have children? And you divide it up on gender. But I guess, and then also, I guess, at what age they were answering the question.
Yes,
or,
correct.
yeah, exactly. But you didn't divide up according to if you already had children or didn't have children.
Nope.
And you didn't divide it up according to class. So I wonder if you have anything more there. The first thing seemed to be rather relevant. I mean, you might, if you already have children, be kind of liberal. You should stop at an earlier age, to say. But it also might be a class factor there.
We haven't done it, but it would be nice to do. So
Looking forward. Okay, so now I'm a bit confused. Was there more follow-up, or that was a new question? Okay. So, is that a follow-up question? Was there a follow-up question or not a follow-up question?
Was there any follow-ups here?
Okay.
Mats had a follow-up.
So you had a follow-up on this, yes. So go for that.
So just briefly, since we're on the topic of coincidental and changes, you only showed us for females. Are there big gender differences here?
Yeah, there are. So it's an excellent question. So there is some evidence that many men state they would prefer to be childless, so have fewer children than women. But typically it's still much below what they are able to realize. So they also intend or ideally want more children typically than what they end up having. And especially for some countries such as Austria and Netherlands tend to have fairly high male childlessness intentions.
Okay, Anders.
Thanks for a very interesting talk. I'm wondering whether we should reconsider the replacement rate, given that we are increasing in longevity quite rapidly. So how to keep the population constant is, I mean, both fertility rates and, of course, longevity.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think you're completely right. We should. And of course, populations can still increase in size with below replacement fertility because of the fact that we are living longer and longer. So that is the aim. We should certainly have other measures of replacements, if you like, or other demographic indicators, which should be more emphasized. So I agree. Yeah.
Have you done that calculus to see what is the global population replacement rate?
So there are estimates on this, and some argue that it should be around, say, 1 point. The optimal for using various outcomes should not be 2.1 or close to 2 now because of low mortality, but it should be possibly close to 1.7, say. Andy Mason, Ron Lee had just worked on this.
Right, thanks.
Happy with that? Yes. Then we go to the gentleman there.
Is there a correlation between the experienced population density around you about your fertility choice? If you live in an urban situation or in a rural situation, is there a difference between not taking education in account?
So there is some evidence, especially it has been perhaps stronger in the past for many countries where more rural regions tend to have considerably higher fertility than more urban regions typically. It's hard to estimate though, because many people who live in urban areas when young then tend to perhaps migrate to, if not rural regions, and peri-urban, more suburban regions outside the major city centers when having children. But yes, there tends to be some link between density in many countries and fertility. In often cases, many cases it is inverse. The more dense, the lower fertility. But not all regions of the world, and so it depends a bit on the context. It might be weaker in, for example, parts of Africa.
Very good. So then we're going to try with Peter again, and if we'll get online here. There we have it. Welcome.
Hey, you hear me? Hey, hello. Hey.
We hear you very well.
I'm good. I'm Vitor Miranda, and I'm demographer at Statistics Sweden. Thanks for the presentation. It's very, very interesting. It's a lot of interesting insights for our population forecast next year. And I want to ask a question related to that, to a forecast. What is your prognosis for the fertility in the Nordic countries in the next, say, 5, 10 years? And now I'm thinking, I know it's a hard question, but I'm thinking about your slides on your theory of fertility, low fertility trap. And if you think at least Finland, if I remember correctly, since 2017 has Finland's TFR below 1.5. At what point should we consider that, well, now a country is under this trap and it should remain low? Do you have any thoughts on that for the Nordic countries in particular? Thank you.
So this is, of course, as it says, record in the corner. So if this is the part where I should say, could you turn off recording for 2 minutes while I answer the question, so I can't be judged on this. But I think one has been consistently wrong in terms of predicting fertility. One has tended to be too optimistic, if you like, with too high fertility rebounding in many countries, including statistical agencies in the Nordics. But I think, use other countries also for other parts of the world. So for example, East Asia might not be that different than what one used to think. So it might represent one plausible scenario for the future. One should have tried to learn from what has happened in cultures that seemed very different, and now their fertility trajectories might be very relevant for our part of the world. So trying to understand country level differences, and also to try to, if possible, try to separate between meaningful groups in terms of, for example, dimensions which might influence fertility, such as the ongoing secularization, which I think is very important in this part of the world for explaining the current drop to very low fertility levels. So taking into account dimensions which are usually excluded, I think that is my key advice for doing population prediction.
Happy with that answer?
Yes. I was expecting a number, but yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, just joking. Thank you.
I would like to give a range if I could, but I think it's hard to know. For Sweden, I would like to spend some time looking at the historical patterns before I give a clear number.
Very good, very good.
Thank you.
So now the gentleman next to Joe there.
Hi, thank you for a very nice presentation. And my comment is that...
you can tell us who you are.
Okay, of course. I'm Linus Andersson. I'm a researcher at Stockholm University. Throughout the presentation, you go through different plausible explanations for low fertility and continued decline, and also in the book covering different perspectives. Yet there's this perspective that is very common, which I didn't really find you going through, and that is like the demand for children in a way, because one way of looking at continuous high fertility intention, or a continuous surveys saying that people prefer not to be childless. That's one thing, but I guess the important question often is like compared to what, right? As in like we can do other things instead and still like something, and so people have gotten richer. We have a lot of things to choose between. What is the demand for children? Is it constant just because people answer in surveys that they still want children? Or do you think that anything in fertility decline is not only a consequence of obstacles appearing, such as I have to buy a house, I have to go through education, but actually a change in the demand for children? An open question. I have certainly not decided on myself about what causes fertility decline.
Yep.
However, I didn't see you go through it in the presentation. Would you like to comment?
No, I think it's a highly relevant point, and I think the focusing on child demand, which is probably more common in economic circles, is a dimension which is useful and relevant, and it's hard to measure, of course, as you know, but it's something we probably could focus more on in the future, and it's a useful framework for trying to assess some of these trends. Yes, so we can do more on that. Yeah, please.
Okay, so
go on.
The follow-up question
Yep.
is so if there is something like a demand for children, or if there's anything historically like just a regime of fertility, then there's something about culture. And you speak in your book about cultural evolution.
Yep.
Are we now like a low fertility culture? And can those cultures, like, how do cultures change from that?
Okay.
Do you think we are a low fertility culture right now, or becoming one?
I think we are, without intentionally becoming one. That's what we ended up being because of maybe not because there's so many things explicitly focusing on childbearing, because there's so much else going on which interferes with childbearing choices, and some dimensions of so many economists often consider demand for children relating to providing household work, providing child work and so forth, providing income for the family, and those aspects can be quantified and estimated, and have been and have changed radically in recent and historical time, so focusing on the growing expenses of children and the lower economic benefits of children is something that could be that certainly also is important. Yes. But I think yes, we are a low fertility culture, but it can change. Yeah, I think it can to some extent change if we become a little bit more aware of it and try to consider how to possibly escape too low fertility. Yeah.
It's high time to turn to political science. So Ludwig Beckman is hiding there in the corner.
So yes, thanks for a great talk. So you mentioned various macro factors that affects the fertility rate or changes in the fertility rates, and you mentioned sociological factors, religion, technology, and so forth. But there was one type of explanation that we political scientists think are sort of very important for most things, and that's the political institutions. You didn't mention them. So, and we tend to have two different hypotheses, or they tend to be two different hypotheses nowadays discussed very much. One is that it's the nature of the political regime, but that is it democratic or is it non-democratic? The other one is not so much the nature of the political regime as such, but the functioning of it in terms of quality, that is the rate of corruption, how corrupt the political regime is. So, and that's kind of a rival discussion now in political science. What is most important for various social and other things in society? Is it the nature of the political regime, or is it the rate of corruption? Do you see the basis for anything of this explaining the rate of fertility, and have you thought about that?
Well, I think I did. This is very important, and I think some of the so many of the issues I discussed, including, for example, social security reform, pension reform, is highly dependent on institutions and how you distribute wealth between generations. Are we in a gerontocracy or not? That type of discussion, which the debate is certainly not settled there. But I think it's we probably would have seen a very different evolution of housing prices if the non-house owning parties would have had a stronger say in political debates, is my view, and that is a challenge. How corruption influences fertility, I'm not sure. I have to consider that.
Just follow up. But do you see any differences at the state, at the country level, between countries that are less democratic and countries that are more democratic in terms of fertility rates, or countries that are more corrupt and countries that are less corrupt in terms of fertility? I mean, you can look at it at aggregate level.
No, I think fertility is generally higher in more democratic countries. No, lower in more democratic countries for sure. But that has to do with many other reasons, such as GDP and access to contraceptives, female education, and so forth. But yeah, it's not causal. No.
Very good. We continue on the political science track, and now second question, Joseph.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. This fairly easy. You talked about the positive effects of having children in age. Did I get this right at the very beginning?
You mean the preference for timing of childbearing? Or
No.
Health. Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more?
Right. So
how good we will fare if we have children?
Right. So in the short term, you might experience more stress, less leisure for sure, certainly less freedom in your life from having children. But in the longer term, people tend to change behavior, and the moment one gets pregnant, there's quite strong evidence that both the the woman and the man are more likely to stop smoking, for example. So one changes risky health behaviors. Maybe one stops doing hang gliding and parachuting. One takes maybe less risks than one otherwise would because one has a family to take care of. And one probably changes one's lifestyles. Plus one has more partnerships tend to be more stable after childbearing, and one can also experience the economic and practical and emotional support of partnerships, but also in the longer term of children. And for many who this is, of course, childbearing is an important dimension of one's life, and having children might be an incentive per se to try to stay healthy and stay alive and well to a higher age. And,
That's great. But like, I mean, the research on happiness,
it
shows a bit the opposite, no? Less happy.
In the shorter term.
Only in the shorter term.
I think so. And in the longer term, it might be the opposite, beneficial. Just wait.
Okay, you happy with that? Good. Next on the list is actually me. I connect a little bit to this, or to Ludwig's question actually more. I mean, you gave us different reasons for why we get this kind of low fertility rate. And I wonder if you have thought, or other people, if you have thought about whether this can be kind of, there are some kind of basic drivers more when it comes to values, more of the kinds that are investigated by the World Value Survey and others. And there you see this shift from kind of traditional values to more idea of self-realization and autonomy. And anecdotally, when you speak to people that decide or are skeptical about having children, they often worry about this kind of decrease of autonomy and freedom, and of course it's this long-term commitment. But and that would also explain some of your other kind of things you mentioned there. So is there something you can say about that? That maybe that's one of the driving factors, especially for women, perhaps.
I'm not sure if it's stronger for women than for men. I think it's important
I'm
for both.
asking.
Well, I think you're completely right. I think these ideational shifts are central for why we are seeing changes in childbearing timing and patterns and outcomes. And this is something we are working on and have. We of course investigated some patterns in depth. One of the most religion is probably the one variable related to values that is most accessible across data sets all over the world, including in roughly half the world censuses. But this is something we're extending our work on, and I think it's important for fertility change.
Ongoing. So this, but we don't know yet how big this driver is. So this kind of, if you believe the World Value Survey, is a kind of constant shift away from traditional values to this.
Yeah, for some parts of the world.
Big
for other parts less.
And they correlate with the fertility or not?
Oh yeah, for sure.
They do?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Good. Then we have Karim.
Yeah, thanks. So Karim, I'm a philosopher, so this is not my area expertise at all. But I was thinking, the way I understand it is that many people, as you also suggested, express a preference for having more children than they end up having in the end. To what extent do you think that that could be addressed by more economic support or incentives? Because even though, as you mentioned, these have been tried, maybe the problem is that we're not trying hard enough, or that we're not giving enough financial and economic support for families that want to have children.
Yeah, no, I think that's central. I think we are not trying hard enough because we don't touch housing, and housing is much more important than the type of policies that are usually introduced. So we're not doing enough, I think.
No, just as a follow-up, because the impression I have from parts of the debate on demography is that people say we have already tried of giving financial support to families. We have, especially in the Nordic countries, we still have not reached replacement level, and that therefore we should try something else. But would it be? I mean, would your view be that this can actually work to reach to replacement level? Since people's stated preferences of the number of children that they want to have is above replacement level.
So I don't. Well, my guess is that we will not come back to replacement levels, but we could go somewhat above where we currently are. And I think there is scope to support young individuals to form families, and also through information. For example, people are unaware of, even highly educated, of the kind of age-related biological reductions in fecundity, for example. So that is something we can do quite a lot.
Very good. So if there are no more questions, join me and thank for this fantastic talk. We have some research seminars coming up. November 8th, we have Kasper Lippert Rasmussen from Aarhus. We're going to talk about the wrongness of stereotyping. And on November 15 at 1500, we have our joint seminar with Rutgers University, Dan Wickler from Harvard on public health. I don't have a title yet. And December 6th, we have Chiara Cordelli, political science at Chicago, who is coming here. So you're very welcome.